Whatever disagreements we may have, we stand united in our commitment to uphold democracy, to protect all our people from harm.
Tom Parker BS had barely touched the thick envelope when King Charles III said the 7 words that froze everyone inside the room. "That document is not for you." Tom's hand stopped instantly. Camilla stared at Charles in disbelief. Prince William lowered his eyes toward the polished table, but Prince Edward remained completely still. He already understood why his name had been written on the final page. The royal family had just reached its breaking point, the crossed-out promise of power. The shocking part of the private Windsor gathering was not that Charles had finally chosen a side. Everyone around that heavily guarded table knew a decision was coming. The devastating part was what had disappeared from the document moments before Charles prepared to sign it. It was one paragraph, 7 carefully protected lines. A private promise Camilla's family had spent years believing would guarantee their place inside the royal circle long after Charles was gone. Now those words were gone. There was no compromise, no reassuring explanation, no last-minute arrangement designed to protect the family from embarrassment. There was only a thick black line cutting directly through the future they believed had already been secured. But then came the second shock. Charles slowly pushed the heavy envelope across the mahogany table. It did not stop before Prince William. It did not stop before Camilla. It stopped directly in front of Prince Edward. Camilla suddenly understood what the meeting was really about. This was not a discussion about family harmony, royal tradition, or keeping everyone comfortable. It was about deciding who could be trusted with what Charles would leave behind: the private residence, the sealed papers, the family memories, and the power surrounding them. For the first time that evening, Camilla realized her family's future was not being protected. It was being rewritten. And the person standing to inherit the responsibility was the one royal nobody expected to become the center of the entire royal decision tonight. The room had been prepared with an unsettling precision. 4 crystal glasses stood untouched beside the polished table. A red leather document box rested between the waiting chairs. 2 palace lawyers sat against the far wall, silent and expressionless. Princess Anne remained beside the fireplace, watching everyone without saying a word. Camilla entered believing she was walking into another private family discussion. She expected difficult questions, perhaps another round of negotiations that could still be softened before dinner. But William had arrived without Catherine. Edward had come alone. Even Charles seemed to understand that this was not an ordinary family conversation. The papers in front of the king had already been arranged. A royal ribbon lay beside the final page. The lawyers had prepared every witness document. Nothing about the setting suggested that Charles was still undecided. Camilla noticed the details, but she did not yet understand what they meant. Tom Parker BS tried to break the silence with a nervous smile. He looked around the room and said, "This feels rather formal." Nobody laughed. Nobody answered. The silence became heavier. One lawyer opened the red box and removed 3 folders. The first carried William's name. The second carried Edward's name. The third had no name at all. Camilla stared at that blank folder. Her expression changed. A blank folder at a meeting like this was not an accident. It suggested that something had been changed, removed, or deliberately held back. Charles began with William. He handed him a single page explaining that the arrangement would not affect the succession or property automatically belonging to the future king. William read it once and placed it beside his glass. He did not ask for clarification. That was the first sign that William already knew more than Camilla had been told. Charles then reached toward the blank folder. Camilla leaned forward slightly, expecting that it might finally be placed in front of her. Instead, Charles opened it himself. Inside was a handwritten letter connected to Queen Elizabeth II. The king looked at the page for several seconds before speaking. It was not a formal will, but it carried a private request concerning a family residence and a collection of personal papers connected to Prince Philip. Then Charles read the final sentence aloud. "Keep it with the child who asks for the least but remembers the most." Camilla immediately looked toward Edward. Edward did not move. That was when the meaning of the folder began to become clear. The quiet brother had not been brought into the meeting as a witness. He had been brought into it because Charles believed he could be trusted with something the rest of the family wanted to influence. Nobody in the room spoke. The blank folder no longer looked empty. It represented a decision that had been hidden inside a family argument for months. Camilla finally understood that the most important thing on the table was not the residence itself. It was who Charles trusted to protect what could never be replaced. Charles closed the letter and explained what had been at the center of the private dispute. It was not a crown, a new title, or a public position. It was control over a private royal residence, its grounds, and a collection of sensitive family papers that had never been placed into the public royal collection. Edward would become the lifetime steward of the residence and archives. He could not sell them or transfer them to his children. But during his lifetime, they would remain under his protection, with William retaining the ultimate authority of the future monarchy. Camilla leaned closer. "And where does that leave us?" Charles looked at her. "With what is already yours." The answer was simple, but it landed heavily. Camilla had her own property and financial arrangements. What she appeared to have expected was something different, a continuing royal connection that would survive Charles and protect her family's place after William became king. Tom finally asked the question nobody else wanted to ask. Wasn't there supposed to be continued family access? Princess Anne answered before Charles could. "There was a proposal." She paused. "Not a promise." The distinction changed the entire conversation. For years, private assurances had apparently created expectations. There had been discussions about holidays, family gatherings, private rooms, and continued access to certain royal spaces. None of those conversations had become a binding legal arrangement. Then William revealed that he had seen an earlier draft. That draft contained a clause allowing selected members of Camilla's family to retain permanent access if a family trustee approved each private use. The idea looked harmless until the suggested trustee was identified. Tom Parker, B.S. Charles took the draft and crossed out the paragraph. William immediately understood the danger. Tom would not own the property, but the trustee role could give him significant control over access, events, and private records. Anne was even more concerned about the archives. Prince Philip's personal papers were not simply family souvenirs. They contained private correspondence and material that could influence how future generations understood the royal household. Anne called the lawyers back into the discussion. Camilla looked at her angrily. "So this was you?" Anne's response was immediate. "No, this is your husband finally reading what he is about to sign." Charles looked down. The room went silent again. Then another document was placed on the table. It was a private letter from Prince Philip describing Edward as reliable, patient, and unlikely to turn responsibility into personal power. That letter changed the meaning of everything. Charles was not giving Edward the property because Edward had demanded it. He was choosing him because Edward had spent years asking for very little. William understood it. Anne understood it. And slowly, even Charles appeared to understand that the decision was less about inheritance than trust. Camilla, however, still believed the decision could be delayed. That belief was about to disappear that evening. Charles asked the lawyers to explain the final signing procedure. Anne and William remained seated. Tom objected. "If this is a private family matter, why are they still here?" Charles looked at him. "Because they are my family." The words produced an uncomfortable silence. Edward then pushed the folder away. "I don't want this if it tears the family apart." Camilla looked surprised. Tom appeared hopeful. Charles stood and placed both hands on the table. "Refusing the responsibility won't stop the problem." Edward said nothing. Charles pointed toward the handwritten letter. "My mother asked for someone who would protect this without turning it into power." Edward looked down at the words. Then he picked up the pen. Camilla immediately asked for more time. 6 months or a year. Anne understood what a delay would create, more negotiations and more pressure. Charles reached for the final page. Camilla placed her hand over it. "You're making it seem like my family was trying to take something that wasn't ours." Charles looked at her hand. "Then, why are you trying so hard to stop me from giving it to Edward?" Camilla had no immediate answer. Tom stepped backward. William looked tired. This was not a victory for him. Charles gently moved Camilla's hand away. Then he signed. Once, then again beneath the witness clause. The arrangement was complete. Edward would protect the residence and private archives during his lifetime. William would retain the ultimate authority of the monarchy when he became king. Camilla would keep her personal arrangements while Charles was alive, but her children would receive no automatic royal privileges through this agreement. The future Camilla believed was gone. Charles then revealed one final page. Her name was printed on it. Camilla looked at the document. Instead, it clearly separated Charles's personal support from any future royal rights for her children or grandchildren. Tom read the page. "Why would you write this unless you thought we were trying to take something?" Charles answered quietly. "Because my silence allowed everyone to believe something different." That was the real failure. He had tried to keep everyone comfortable with private promises that were never formalized. He had reassured Camilla, avoided difficult conversations with Anne, and assumed Edward would never complain. But the final document forced every vague promise into the open. Once it was there, Charles had to choose. He chose clarity. He chose Edward. As the room fell silent, the royal signature ribbon was placed back inside the red document box. Edward understood why his father had chosen him. The residence was not a reward and the documents were not trophies. They were pieces of family history that could become valuable to people seeking influence. Accepting meant protecting them from pressure inside the family and outside it. Charles waited for his answer. The heavy wooden door finally closed behind them, and for the first time that evening, there was nothing left to negotiate. The documents had been signed. The decision had been recorded. Edward remained holding the folder that had changed the balance of the entire family. William had already begun thinking about the future reign. Anne stayed focused on protecting the private archives. Charles looked exhausted, as though years of unanswered questions had finally caught up with him. Camilla stood alone in the corridor. She had entered the meeting believing her family's place inside the royal circle was secure. She left knowing that Charles had drawn a line between what belonged to her personally and what could ever belong to her family after him. Edward eventually passed her. He did not celebrate. He did not smile. He simply held the folder closer and continued down the corridor. That may have been the most revealing moment of the entire night. The man who received the responsibility was the one who appeared to want it the least. And the family members who expected continued influence were the ones who discovered that expectation was never the same thing as entitlement. So what do you think? Did Charles make the difficult choice necessary to protect the royal legacy? Or did he unfairly shut Camilla's family out of a future they believed had been promised? Tell me your opinion in the comments. And if this royal mystery surprised you, make sure to like this video, Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more dramatic royal stories, hidden family conflicts, and secrets from behind the palace walls. The next royal story is already waiting for you.